Thanks for listening to the Mornings with Carmen LaBerge podcast, made available thanks to support from listeners just like you.
Your daily encouragement that God has the world in the hollow of his hand. This is Mornings with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power we will go. By your spirit we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
25 years ago, Chipotle was the hottest new thing in town. Yep, it was 25 years ago this week that Chipotle opened its first restaurant in Minnesota. Sometimes it's just random little facts that catch my attention on a given morning. Good morning. It is Monday, the 11th of March, 2024. The Academy Awards were last night. No, I did not stay up to watch them. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. The event is known for its glamorous gowns and sometimes its politically charged commentary. One of the things getting press this morning is the appearance on stage as a presenter. John Cena was a part of presenting one of the Academy Awards last night, actually the award for Best Costume. What would be the most striking costume that a person might wear to present the Oscar for Best Costume? How about your birthday suit? How about your birthday suit being the best costume a person could wear to present the Oscar for Best Costume? That's right. John Cena walked on to the stage, delicately holding the card listing the nominees. He was only wearing a pair of what appeared to be Birkenstocks. That's it. I will say that the appearance of a man completely naked on stage at the Oscars left almost nothing to the imagination, but was also, maybe for Christians, an opportunity to talk about, like, you know, the best costume ever made is the one that God made, right? I mean, there's just nothing better looking out there. So who are you wearing today is the question that I am led to ask. So we're going to talk about that here for just a moment. Who are you wearing today? Have you put on Christ? Is Christ just a put on for you? Have you put on the full armor of God today? Who are you wearing today? What are you wearing today? Oppenheimer got Best Picture last night, as well as 5 other awards. As Adam Holtz predicted here, the Emma Stone, who portrayed the lead character in a terrible, awful, horrible movie called Poor Things, won the Oscar for Best Actress. That particular film also took home 3 other Oscars. Beyond that, the talk was predictably about the so-called, red carpet. So every year at the time of the Oscars, I am led to reflect on this question that celebrities or celebrity reporters, anyway, often ask. They ask those on the red carpet, hey, who are you wearing? Now, designers of all kind actually compete to dress those who are going to be on stage at the Oscars. And so, you know, John Cena, who dressed him? Well, God dressed him in his birthday suit, nonetheless. So it's a provocative question. Who are you wearing? Hey, who are you wearing? Well, Ephesians 6 tells us to put on the full armor of God. Galatians 3 tells us to clothe ourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. So we are to put off the ways of the world and to put on Christ, which of course leads us to the question, is Christ just a put on? So I want you to ask yourself that. Is it just a put on? When you put on Christ today, is it just a put on? Or has it become flesh of your flesh, bone of your bone? Have you become the body of Christ, a member of the body of Christ in the world today? I want you to think about the body of Christ during this season of Lent. I want you to think about walking with Jesus all the way to the cross. I want you to think about the God on high who took on flesh to dwell among us, full of grace and truth. I want you to think about the incarnation, Jesus taking on human flesh. Yes, I want you to think about Christmas, but I also want you to think about Maundy Thursday, and when the one who took on flesh, dwelling among us full of grace and truth, took off his outer garment and picked up a basin and washed the feet of his disciples. I want you to think about him being stripped of his dignity. I want you to think about the purple robe they placed on him and the crown of thorns they pressed down into his brow. And yes, I want you to think about Jesus in the flesh, being brutalized, flogged, crucified. I want you to think about his nail-pierced hands and his nail-pierced feet. And then I want you to think about what it means to put on Christ in the world today. If you're a Christian, then like me, you are called to put off the things of the world and put on Christ. Not as an ornament, not as an accoutrement, but as the covering of sin and the outward manifestation of Christ to the world today. As Christ's representatives, we do more than just put him on as a put on. We represent him to the world that he so loves. So as you walk your faith out into the world that God so loves today, let me encourage you. Put on the full armor of God from Ephesians 6, and over all things, put on love. Clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ, as it says in Ephesians 3. Put off the ways of the world and put on Jesus. And so help us, God. May it be more than a put on. Next up, we're going to air a conversation that I had with Jody Gold. She's the author of The Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. When is the last time that you found yourself in a hospital or healthcare setting with a loved one and you just didn't even know how to navigate that system? Well, Jody has navigated the hospital system as a former patient, as a daughter, as a sister of a long-term patient, and she's going to share with us how the system of care works and the information gap that she experienced and now seeks to fill with the Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. That's up next here on Mornings with Carmen. Jody Gold is your best friend who you haven't met yet. And so just prepare yourself right now for a gift, a total gift of God to each and every one of us. Jody is... well, she's a number of things relationally, but she's joining us today as an author. The book we're going to look at is The Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. Jody, welcome to Mornings with Carmen.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
You are that girl who has been there and done that in terms of caring for people you love in a hospital context. So maybe just start right there. When I say, like, Jody has been there and done that, she is an authority in her own right in terms of medical care and how we care for people who are hospitalized. Just talk a little bit about your own experiences in that caregiving setting.
Yes, well, mine was actually during COVID. My mother was hospitalized. My brother was also hospitalized. They were 18 months apart. And during that time, you could not visit in a hospital. So most of my interaction was done over the phone, talking to nurses and doctors. So it was hard because I'm in a different state So I spent most of my time on the phone. And then my brother was in a care facility. So he had caregivers, multiple caregivers. And so I was trying to organize them in the hospital setting so that somebody could be with him all the time, which proved to be challenging. I spent a lot of time with social workers, care coordinators, just anybody who could answer questions and make the process go a little bit smoother for the patient and the caregiver.
Who is Glenn Gold?
That's my husband.
So Glenn says this in the foreword of the Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. The guide that you hold in your hands is the result of the real life experiences that Jody encountered while caring for her mother and then taking over the mantle to care for her disabled brother after her mom's passing. A labor of love born out of the grief of losing two family members while navigating the maze of medical care. You will find, just as Jody did, that there are many compassionate and caring people in the healthcare system, but they are overwhelmed. And being even a little bit prepared will not only help you, it's going to help the healthcare staff provide the best care possible. That is actually what the book delivers. Like, you have put together, I feel like, a resource that you could have really used at the beginning of your own caregiving journey. So can you just talk about what is contained in the Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care, and how it really met your needs, and then you're passing it along to others to meet our needs as well.
Right. So the things that I wish I would have had during that time is just guidance. I didn't really have anyone to ask, like, what should I do about, when this happens? And part of the things that go on during a hospital visit, things happen so quickly. And so you can't really sit back and say, okay, well, let's make a plan for this and let's make a plan for that, because care changes so rapidly. And for me, not having the guidance and who to ask and what to ask, that's what this book really came out of, trying to figure out how to navigate each piece of the system, not just the nursing and the doctors, but the caregivers, the facility people. So I was on the phone, I was on email, I was trying to figure out the best way to care for my mother and then the best way to care for my brother. And all these things sort of came about during that time, like the special circumstances for my brother. He was delayed, and so he wasn't able to advocate for himself. And during the time of COVID, his caregivers were not allowed in the hospital during certain times, and he was used to being cared for, and these people knew what his needs were. And so it was really difficult to advocate for him because he couldn't advocate for himself, and his caregivers couldn't be there. So a lot of the things in here are just things that I learned along the way. And at the end, when it was all said and done, there was a beautiful social worker. His name is Ted Lynch, and he advocates for the book. And he said, you did a great job with this. And I said, this is the hardest, probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And he said, well, I said, I should write a book about this because I think this could really help people. And he said, do it. And so I just met with Ted last month and gave him the book. So we're trying to figure out how we can get it into the hospital system, into clinics, in front of care facilities, and put it in the hands of people who need it so they can have, it's not a lot of stuff. It's just really important things that you need to know.
It's really good. We're going to talk about some of the specifics here in just a moment. But as you're listening, if you're thinking to yourself, hey, I know how to do that. I have a connection to a healthcare provider or a network of physicians, or, I'm wired in to my local, name the organization. Maybe you are Christian Medical and Dental Association allied, or you are a nurse in a particular network, or you're a caregiver who works out of a particular group. We would love to connect you directly with this resource. So you can text me 877-933-2484. You can connect directly with Jody at jodylgold.com. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. We're talking with Jody Gold. The resource is a caregiver's quick guide to medical care, how to navigate hospital care, communication, and services. 150 million people actively use one particular app every month in the United States of America. I want that to be the Faith Radio app. How about you? If you're wondering how you could be encouraged in your faith at any time, anywhere, well, I got good news for you. There's literally an app for that. You can listen to Faith Radio live, any show on demand, no matter where you are at any time of the day or night. Download the free Faith Radio app right now. It's super easy. Just text the word app to 877-933-2484 and click the link. Let's connect faith to life. Continuing our conversation now with Jody Gold. She's the author of The Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. Let me just ask you this as you're listening right now. Do you know what comfort care is? Do you know what it means? Do you know do you know what a CPAP is, or when it's referred to in a clinical setting? How about, I don't know, POA? Yeah, that's power of attorney. I'm going through the list here in the back of the book. How about SNF, skilled nursing facility, or ROI? That's not return on investment. That's release of information. One of the things that's included in the Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care is just a definition of terms. Jody, I was thinking as I was reading through that, having been through a number of hospital stays with my stepson, who has been in the pediatric ICU more times over the course of his life than I can even chronicle or count. The terms that are used are spoken very, very quickly by people for whom they are like everyday parlance. And for me, they were totally new. And so I remember this exercise of being, like trying to listen really carefully, but there being terms being used that I didn't know, and not wanting to be the person who interrupted and said, okay, I don't know what that means. So I'm wondering if that's the experience you had as well.
I did. And mine was basically over the telephone. So a lot of it, I didn't even get to catch, you know what I mean? It was all in passing. And so a lot of these things I would say I did know, but I didn't have experience dealing with caring for someone else and knowing which one of these things was needed next, what the next step was.
So when you think about hospital navigation, this is another part that I just thought was important. There's a couple of times just in this very brief section where you talk about, your persons, your loved ones, their individual needs and their preferences. And later you talk about the need to communicate what they prefer. And you might have to do that multiple times because the person or the people who are providing care change. Every shift they change. And then in every unit they change. And over time they change. Talk a little bit with us about the need to sort of get your information collected together, be prepared to say it succinctly over and over and over again. Because I feel like that is some of the really clear guidance of this resource.
Yes, you will have to say it over and over because there are so many different people involved. I'm actually working with Ted Lynch, who's the social worker at the hospital down in Reading, where we sort of went through this whole thing. And I had this great idea that we should, I came up with this thing called the Patient Baseline Board, and it's in production right now. It's not finished. And basically what it is it has the information on it about the patient, and it's going to be put on the back of the bed. And so by doing this, it's got all the special things for your person. So like it says to speak slowly or make eye contact with them. They need eating assistance, or maybe the patient is scared. Maybe they have fear of needles. Maybe they need a quiet room. Sort of all the things that if they're not very verbal, the things that they would need people to know. And so this patient baseline board is going to be put on the back of the bed. And the idea behind it is that it will go wherever the patient goes. So when the patient leaves their room to go get an x-ray, it doesn't necessarily happen that the nurse that's in the room with the patient indicates all these things that, the patient has a fear of needles, or that, let's just say the patient somewhere in their life had cancer and you're only allowed to put the IV in a certain arm. They're not able to advocate for themselves. Mm-hmm. So the idea behind this is going to stay with the patient wherever they go. And by doing so, we're not going to end up, in my case, my brother was in a wheelchair. And I got a call that said the physical therapist had my brother walking around the room. And I was horrified. And I said, wait, didn't somebody tell him that he's in a wheelchair? He doesn't walk. And
Mm.
so by having this important information about each patient on their bed with them, wherever they go, I feel it's going to make caregiving easier, even for the staff, because they don't have time to pass information to each other.
That's right. Your experience and the conversation we're having reminds me of a conversation I had. Oh, it's been, I don't know, probably 8 years ago now. There's a former journalist. She worked for Time magazine, and her name is J. Newton Small. And her dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she was, she cared for him for like 3 years, and then she needed to move him into a care facility. His memory issues progressed, and he became more and more agitated. And she tells the story of when she arrives, them giving her this like 20-page questionnaire, and it's just check boxes. And she said, I was about halfway through it when I realized there is no way anyone caring for my dad on a moment by moment basis is going to leaf through 20 pages and see what these check marks say. There's got to be a better way to communicate who my dad is, what his preferences are, what are the things that he finds calming, what are what are his preferences was the word that you used that sort of triggered this memory in relationship to what Jay said so long ago. I think that this caregiving role comes upon us, and others are then really the ones at that first line of caregiving, but we're the ones who actually know what our loved one needs, wants, and likes. And so her ministry is now called Memory Well, but it's a little bit like your board, your patient baseline board, in that on the door of her dad's room, she just like put his story, like she wrote his story as a narrative, so that, in very, very brief form, so that people could know who they were dealing with, even though that is not the person that's sort of inhabiting that body anymore. Like in terms of their experience of him, he's not, he is not who he has become. He really still is who he was. And so how do we help people who've just met our loved one actually know them? And I felt like that's so much of what you're helping us do, particularly with these daily call and check-in sheets that you provide in the back. Like, that's just super duper helpful, right? Like, I'm going to repeat this information over and over again. I'm going to be sure that I write my questions down in advance so that I can articulate them. It's just really practical and super helpful. It's the Caregiver's Quick Guide to Medical Care. Jody L. Gold is the author. You can connect with Jody directly and get more information at jodylgold.com. Jody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'm wondering right now what you have found helpful. You are a caregiver. So many of you on the text line right now serving in those caregiving roles. Walt, I'm wondering what you have found helpful as the caregiver of your wife. And Jessica, I remember that you have a friend who put together a whole notebook related to caregiving when one of her parents fell ill, and that was a surprise. And April says, I remember something like a clipboard being used beside the bed, but most of the practical ideas disappeared because of privacy laws. Yeah, so that's reality. But if you, as that person's medical power of attorney, which is a whole nother question and conversation that we could get into at some point in time, you can actually make whatever information you want to be made available to caregivers. And so when we talk about information that we're providing to people who are going to be giving care to our mom or our dad or our sister or our brother, our aunt, our uncle, our spouse, our child, the information that we're talking about is not necessarily medical information. Like, I know my mom, and I know the things that my mom prefers. I know that she wants to have her makeup done. I know that if possible, she wants to have her nails done. I know that she wants to look presentable for everyone all the time. She wants to make a good impression, even on that doctor when he walks in the room to care for her. And so what does it look like to tell the story of our person, of our people, especially when they're not in a position to tell their own story. And so if a person is intubated, obviously they can't speak. So how are we going to speak on their behalf? And sometimes that's going to be in pictures. Like, go ahead and put up some pictures so that your person becomes a real living person in that room, even when they can't speak for themselves or maybe aren't even conscious. Like, help the caregivers that are in and out of that room actually see your person. And help them to get to know your person, to be able to say, hey, my mom is one of the most resilient people that I've ever known in my whole life. And she is a person who really likes coffee and really hates cottage cheese. She is a person who really likes Reese's, but really hates coconut. Like, whatever, the things that actually humanize the individual when they are a patient and unable to speak for themselves. So I'm wondering what resources you have found that you have used. Would love to hear about those and make those accessible to other people. And yes, humanizing people, really, really important, because oftentimes we are objectified and dehumanized, particularly in healthcare settings where we become we become a project. We become a science experiment. We're not necessarily human. We are, for them, one patient among many who they are going to see over the course of time. And you got to help. You have to actually help and intervene and humanize your person for others. You can actually email Jody directly. She has invited that. For those of you interested in connecting, JL_gold. JL_gold at hotmail.com. Jody Gold, author of the Caregivers Quick Guide to Medical Care, is inviting you to email her directly if you have follow-up questions or want to have a conversation. JL_gold at hotmail.com. All right, you have heard the claim that Christianity is more caught than taught, right? Well, to understand that, you have to understand something about fish. Fish are fishy, right? Yes, fish are fishy. Fish swim in schools, and a large part of what they learn from one another is how not to get caught. Fish swim in schools, and what they learn from one another is how not to get caught. Well, I want to talk to the right fish right now. I want to talk today to the right fish. The fish who have been caught and have then in turn become fishers of men. So this is not about a nursery rhyme of red fish, blue fish, one fish, two fish. This is about a parable of the right fish. Oh, you don't know the parable of the right fish? Cy Gart is going to join us next. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. All right, Cy Gart is joining us again today. Among many other things, he's the author of Science and Faith in Harmony. Cy, welcome back to Mornings with Carmen.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, so you heard the setup. I would love for you to share with us about the dream you had. Jesus met you in church on Maundy Thursday, the day, for those of you listening, Maundy Thursday may or may not be something that rings a bell in your mind. It's the day during Holy Week when Jesus shared the Last Supper with his disciples, the day he washed their feet, the day he walked with them to the Garden of Gethsemane, the day he was betrayed and tried. So, Cy, Jesus told you a parable during the dream. Can you share that with us now?
Yeah, this is in the very last chapter of that book that you mentioned, Science and Faith in Harmony, and the chapter's called Amen. This is the close of the chapter, and I'll just read that part very quickly. Once there was a fisherman who was never lucky. This is what Jesus told me in the dream. Who was never lucky. He struggled to catch enough fish to survive. He prayed all the time for mercy, for help in catching fish. I answered his prayer, but I also told him that it didn't matter so much how many fish he caught, that what mattered was that he caught the right fish. When I woke up and prayed my thanks to God for coming to me once again in a dream, but I didn't understand the parable. What did it mean to catch the right fish? Weren't all fish more or less the same? And if you've been referring to something other than fish, people perhaps, then who are the right persons and how are they different from the others? It wasn't until I was writing this book that the answer came to me. You are the right fish. Yes, you, the person reading these words, or at this moment, the person listening to our show. My
So I
readership,
Yeah,
yeah,
go
I'm sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead and finish the thought because I
Uh,
think that you're landing the plane here and it's really, really helpful.
my readership is not all people out there, but those who love science and their Christian faith, and perhaps some folks who are curious or have questions about either or both. Jesus was telling me that what matters is that the right people get to read my words and hopefully take something useful from them. So that's uh, I went on a little bit, but I'll stop there. And I think I don't know if that it fits well theologically with Christianity because we really want all people to hear the words of faith, not just a few
Right.
people. But uh, I think I had that dream. And by the way, that was a real dream that I had. And I was quite confused when I woke up. I really didn't have any idea what it meant. And I'm still not sure that that's what it meant, but that's my guess. And I think what I was trying to say is that it's a two-way street. We want everyone to come to faith and we want to spread the word to everyone. But uh, within everyone, there are people who are ready and people have to also take that step, maybe pick up a book, listen to your radio program, do something that allows the word of God to reach them. And those people are the right fish ready to be caught, brought into the boat, and shown the truth of Jesus Christ. And I think that's probably legitimate. And I think many people in apologetics who are doing incredible work trying to save as many people as possible. Many of them are my friends, and I love and respect the work they do, and I think it's wonderful. But I also think there is something to be said for making sure that when it's that whole phrase of casting pearls before swine and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the other sayings of Jesus, where he made it clear that at a certain point you have to shake the dust from your feet,
Mm-hmm.
as he told his disciples, uh, and say, okay, they're not ready. They're not ready to hear this, and there are people who are ready, and it's to them that I'm going to take my message first.
So we're going to talk to the right fish right now. So if you're listening right now, Cy and I are assuming that you love God and you are interested in the things of God. We also know that because you are a person living in 21st century America, most likely, you are at some level a person living in a society awash in science where people present themselves as experts because they are scientists. And so we want to talk about what is sometimes perceived as a conflict between science and the things of the Christian faith. And instead, we want to look at the harmony of those two. So the book is Science and Faith in Harmony. Contemplation as distilled doxology. Don't let those big words throw you off. We are the right fish. So, Cy, remind us of the premise of the book. What is the mystery of harmony in science and faith?
Right. So, I mean, I think I mentioned this last time, but if not, I'll say it. I came from a musical background, actually, and I at one point wanted to be a musician. I love music. And in my musical training, I learned a lot about harmony. I learned the science of harmony, but the beauty of harmony, you don't need to know anything about that. You just listen. And when you hear two melodic lines, which are not the same, but they merge beautifully together, say a soprano singing one line and a tenor or a bass singing another, that's beautiful. That's even more beautiful than the melody itself. And science and faith don't play the same notes. They don't say the exact same thing. But what they do say is beautifully harmonious. And the book has 44 chapters which illustrate that harmony. They're very short chapters.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say it reads like a devotional. And each one is an example from some field of science or some field of theology and shows how the two very different melodies come together beautifully in harmony.
All right, because you have mentioned music, I think maybe we should jump into the God, genes, and guitars conversation, the power of music and the love of Jesus at a scientific meeting. What happened?
Well, yeah, this was a this was an experience I had shortly after I came to faith, and I had been to I don't know how many scientific conferences, maybe 50 or more, and people give talks, and people meet and talk with each other. But I'd never been to a religious conference. This was the first one I'd ever been to. But it was a conference where people were mostly scientists, but not entirely, but they were Christians as well. And one of the people speaking was someone who I had just become my boss, Francis Collins, who is a very famous geneticist, who is also a very devout Christian. And it turns out, I found out because I was also working at the NIH, and it turns out that everyone who works there knows that whenever Dr. Collins runs a meeting, he always comes with his guitar, and he generally sings a song which he has written, and he did that at this meeting as well. And the amazing thing was that also at the meeting was N.T. Wright, the very famous English theologian who's written amazing books about the New Testament. And he's called Tom generally. So Tom Wright and Francis Collins, turns out Wright also plays the guitar and sings. And both of these men are not only brilliant in their fields, they're also quite tall. And I was able to watch the two of them kind of spontaneously pick up two guitars and begin to sing several songs, one of which was Amazing Grace, which is the first hymn I ever learned, and I love it. And they sang a song that was original as well, and I just found that overwhelmingly beautiful. And then at that same meeting, I was asked to say just a few words about my journey coming to faith, and I was very nervous about that, which is kind of strange because I've given many, many talks in my life. I'm not usually nervous about that, but I was this time, first of all, because of who was in the audience, and second of all, because I had never spoken in that context before. I'd never talked about my faith at all. And I was so nervous, I was almost worried that I wouldn't be able to get up, but there was a worship band there, and they started again playing Amazing Grace. And that I just prayed. I know the words very well, and I got calm, and I was able to get up and give a short 10-minute talk, and it was a wonderful experience altogether.
We're talking with Dr. Cy. We're talking with Dr. Cy Gart. We are talking, among other things, about his book "Science and Faith in Harmony." Contemplations on a Distilled Doxology. We got to take a very brief break. When we come back, I'm going to invite him to talk about a couple of concepts that emerge in the book. One of them is humility, and the other is elegance. Have you ever thought about elegance as a word that you could use in conversation about science and faith? That's up next here on Mornings with Carmen. If you're a new listener, we want to officially welcome you with a free welcome pack gift. Request yours today at myfaithradio.com. You can connect with Dr. Cy Gart at S-Y Gart, GARTE.com, cygart.com. If you've wanted a companion for the journey in the conversation that happens every day between science and faith, and you want to harmonize those conversations, this is the guy to help you do that. So Science and Faith in Harmony is the name of the book. Again, you can connect directly with Dr. Cy Gart at S-Y Gart, GARTE.com. Cy, one of the unique features of this book is these QR codes at the end of each one of these very brief chapters where we can seek further. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the way that you have actually integrated science into the book in that particular way.
Right.
I would like for you to talk about two of the concepts that you introduced very, very early in the book, chapters 1 and 2. One is humility and the other is elegance.
Yeah, let me start with elegance, if I may. Elegant, we all have definitions for elegance and what's elegant. But in science, the word elegant has a very special and specific meaning. It's actually the highest form of praise that you can give to a scientist for their work. If somebody says, well, that's an elegant paper or that's an elegant piece of work, there's nothing better than that. And it's hard to define it exactly, but what it kind of means something like a solution that covers more than it was supposed to. It's an equation that's simple yet absolutely true. An example is E equals MC squared. Very simple equation, 3 terms, but it's so important. And elegance is rare. I mean, the double helix of DNA was an elegant solution. And I was thinking about elegance in science, and then I was trying to think, well, how does that relate to, what we think of elegance in a more colloquial way, in the regular way of speaking. And I realized that there's something perhaps not quite harmonious here, and I might just read a brief passage to explain that. I was at Lincoln Center one time in New York, and while I was walking around, I saw that there was some kind of a celebrity affair going on. Part of it was open to the public. I saw some very elegant people dressed in high fashion, moving and gesturing and speaking with perfect aplomb and charm. Then, stepping outside, I saw an older woman in baggy, faded slacks with messy hair, walking with a slight limp, not a touch of elegance about her. As I watched, she stopped next to a homeless man and offered him some money. I saw her smile and say some words that elicited a smile and a nod from the man. She may not have been an example of anything we call elegance, but her Christ-like actions held more beauty than any of the celebrities drinking their cocktails. And the reason I tell that, and then I say it probably isn't elegance, but grace that we should be seeking. And so I told that story because I believe that is true. What we call elegance often becomes something that is, nice in a way, but not really what counts. What counts in our life is to have grace, to act in a Christ-like way. And sometimes that will appear elegant and sometimes it won't. Mm-hmm. But I think that, we can use that term, if we use that term in a scientific sense, in the sense of an action or a discovery or something that is profound and incredibly important, then that older woman who was disheveled and not very well dressed was the epitome of elegance.
All right, Cy, on the subject of humility, I think that's an easy one. It's an easy one when we're talking about the things of faith. Can you briefly talk about humility as a key component when we're talking about science?
Yes, and that's really critical because I have discovered, with many exceptions, but I've met some really good scientists in my time, including several Nobel Prize winners. And the thing that always struck me was their humility. And these are people who have made major scientific discoveries and have a great deal of fame, but they don't wear it the way perhaps a famous celebrity, let's say, in entertainment or sports might. They are very humble. And I think the reason for that is because they know, as all scientists should know, and they know better because they're very good scientists, that what they've done may be very, very good and very useful, but it could also be overturned by the next discovery. So this happens all the time in science. Somebody makes a finding and is very proud of it. It's great. It's publicized. It's published. And then 3 years later, by the way, this happened to me, somebody else does another finding and finds that that first one was not right or needed to be corrected or modified or changed. So pride is rare. And it, of course, it also, like anywhere, it doesn't sit well. And science is a very social activity. People think of scientists as somebody standing alone in a laboratory, and that's not it at all. It's a group effort, and there's a huge amount of social interaction in the scientific world. And so humility is called for. And as I said, almost all the really good scientists I've known have had that, whether they're Christians or not. And of course, those who are Christians have it in a double dose. And some of them are just wonderful people and also excellent scientists.
So, Cy, do you think that in a minute you can help us understand in this season of spring the glorious story of how plants turn light into energy?
Okay, so in a minute, I would just say that the way plants turn light into energy is by a process called photosynthesis, which is extremely complicated and complex. I actually failed a test in graduate school on photosynthesis. It's very difficult to understand completely. But really what it is that there's a long process of many components within cells, within plant cells. But the last step is that a bunch of hydrogen atoms, which are little tiny protons, go through a membrane and push a biochemical machine that has a wheel, and the wheel turns, and as it turns, it makes this compound called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And ATP is the chemical that gives energy to all of life. All cells and all organisms use ATP. So and the original source of that is light energy, which is turned into the mechanical energy of the wheel, which is turned into the chemical energy of this ATP. So it's an incredible story. I think it's chapter 4 or so in the book. And I talk about that in harmony with the beauty of the natural world and the pleasure I get from seeing God's creation and also knowing how it works.
I know. I just love that. I love the harmony that you help us see between faith and science. The book is Science and Faith in Harmony. I commend it to you. You can connect directly with Cy and the book at cygart.com. You've been listening to Mornings with Carmen. We're completely out of time today. Have a great day, and God bless. Thanks for listening to Mornings with Carmen LaBerge. Podcasts like this are available because of your support. If it's important to you to hear things that encourage your faith, click the link in the show notes to give now. And thanks.